Have you ever reached the pinnacle of your life's ambition, only to find an emptiness echoing in the halls of your greatest victory? What happens when the war is over, the throne is won, and the world lies subdued at your feet, yet the soul remains a battlefield? Before we journey further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. It helps these ancient voices echo just a little louder in our modern world. This is not a story about the acquisition of power, but about the profound mystery of its renunciation. It is a journey into the heart of a king who had everything and chose to walk away from it all, trading an empire for enlightenment, a crown for a question. We are invited to explore the enigmatic departure of a ruler who, after achieving the zenith of earthly glory, embarked on a final mystical quest not for more dominion, but for a truth that lay beyond the confines of his kingdom and himself. This is the saga of Kay Khosrow, the legendary king of Persia, a man who conquered his enemies and then faced the most formidable opponent of all, the deceptive allure of his own triumph. Join us as we unravel the reasons behind one of history's most profound and least understood abdications, a story that challenges our very notions of success and the ultimate purpose of our existence. Now let us step back into a world of myth and majesty to witness the reign and the remarkable renunciation of a king who dared to ask what lies beyond the throne. The story of Kay Khosrow is not merely a chronicle of kingship. It is a profound meditation on the nature of power, legacy, and the insatiable yearning of the human spirit for something beyond the material world. To understand his final, astonishing act of abdication, we must first traverse the blood-soaked and treacherous path that led him to the throne. His was a destiny forged in tragedy and exile, a narrative that begins not with the pomp of a palace, but with the murder of a noble prince. Kay Khosrow was the son of Siyavash, a paragon of virtue in Persian law, and Ferdowsi, the daughter of the Turanian king Afrasiab. This union, a fragile bridge between two warring nations, was shattered by deceit and suspicion. Siyavash, falsely accused and driven from his homeland, was unjustly executed by his own father-in-law, Afrasiab, a deed that would cast a long and bloody shadow over the generations. Thus, Kay Khosrow was born into a world of peril, an orphan prince in the court of his father's murderer. His very existence was a threat to Afrasiab's reign, a constant reminder of a crime that could not be washed away. To save the child, the wise vizier Piran entrusted him to the care of shepherds in the wilderness, far from the intrigues and dangers of the royal court. This rustic upbringing, away from the corrupting influence of power, would prove to be a crucible for the future king's character, instilling in him a humility and a connection to the common people that would later define his reign. His childhood, therefore, was a paradox, a king's heir raised in obscurity, a savior hidden in the heart of enemy territory. This archetypal narrative of the hidden hero, the child of prophecy, nurtured in secret, resonates across cultures and myths, from Moses in the bulrushes to King Arthur in Avalon. It speaks to a universal truth about the nature of destiny and the unpredictable paths through which greatness can emerge. Kay Khosrow's early life was a testament to the idea that true strength is often forged not in the lap of luxury, but in the crucible of adversity. The eventual return of Kay Khosrow to Iran was not a simple homecoming. It was the culmination of a perilous quest and the fulfillment of a prophecy that had kept hope alive in a kingdom languishing under the shadow of its enemies. The hero Give, guided by a divine dream, embarked on a 7-year search to find the lost prince and bring him back to claim his birthright. The journey was fraught with danger, a testament to the lengths to which the forces of destiny will go to restore balance to the world. Upon his arrival in Iran, Kay Khosrow was not immediately handed the crown. He had to prove his worthiness, his far, that divine light of kingship that separated the true ruler from the mere pretender. He faced a series of trials, tests of wisdom and courage that would solidify his claim in the eyes of the Persian nobles and warriors. His ascension to the throne was not a matter of inheritance alone. It was a right that had to be earned. Once established as the Shah, Kay Khosrow's reign was dominated by a singular, all-consuming purpose to avenge the wrongful death of his father, Siyavash. This was not merely a personal vendetta. It was a sacred duty, a quest for justice that would define the first chapter of his rule and plunge the kingdoms of Iran and Turan into a long and brutal war. The conflict with Afrasiab was more than just a clash of armies. It was a battle between light and darkness, between justice and tyranny, a theme that lies at the very heart of Zoroastrian cosmology. Kay Khosrow, as the righteous king, became the instrument of divine retribution, the avenging son destined to bring down the murderer of his father. This epic struggle, filled with heroic deeds and tragic losses, is one of the central narratives of the Shahnameh, a testament to the enduring power of filial piety and the relentless pursuit of justice. The war was long and arduous, a testament to the tenacity of both sides, but ultimately it was Kay Khosrow's unwavering resolve and the valor of his legendary champions, like the mighty Rustam, that turned the tide. The capture and execution of Afrasiab marked the culmination of this epic saga, a moment of profound catharsis for the Persian kingdom. With the death of his nemesis, Kay Khosrow had not only avenged his father, but had also secured the borders of his realm and brought an end to a conflict that had plagued the two nations for generations. The world was finally at peace, and the king stood at the apex of his power, his authority unquestioned, his legacy seemingly secure. And it was precisely at this moment of ultimate triumph that the seeds of his extraordinary renunciation began to take root. With his enemies vanquished and his kingdom secure, Kay Khosrow ushered in an era of unparalleled peace and prosperity. He ruled with a wisdom and justice that won the hearts of his people, his reign becoming a golden age in the annals of Persian history. Yet, as the years of tranquil governance passed, a profound and unsettling change began to stir within the king's soul. Having reached the summit of earthly power, he discovered that the view was not what he had expected. The silence that followed the clamor of war was filled with a disquieting emptiness. The throne, once the object of his righteous quest, now felt like a gilded cage. A deep spiritual weariness settled upon him, a sense that the material world, with all its glories and triumphs, could not offer the ultimate solace his spirit craved. This was not the disillusionment of a failed king, but the far more profound melancholy of a successful one who had come to realize the inherent limitations of his success. He had achieved everything a mortal ruler could desire, and in that very achievement he confronted the finitude of all worldly things. The crown felt heavy, not with the weight of responsibility, but with the burden of its own material nature. The vastness of his kingdom seemed to shrink in the face of the infinite expanse of his own inner world. He began to turn his gaze inward, seeking a truth that could not be found in the decrees of a king or the maps of an empire. The world had been set to rights, but his own soul remained a territory yet to be explored, a realm with its own shadows and its own untamed frontiers. This inner turmoil marked the beginning of a new journey for Kay Khosrow, a quest not for a greater kingdom, but for a higher state of being. The internal conflict that gripped Kay Khosrow was rooted in a deep-seated fear of the corrupting nature of absolute power. He had witnessed firsthand how the arrogance of kings could lead to their downfall. He was haunted by the examples of his predecessors, like the legendary kings Jamshid and his own grandfather Kay Khosrow, who, at the height of their power, had grown prideful and had ultimately lost their divine grace, or far. This far, a central concept in Zoroastrian kingship, was a mystical aura of legitimacy and divine favor, a light that shone upon the rightful ruler. To lose it was to lose not just the throne, but one's very connection to the divine order. Kay Khosrow became obsessed with the fear that he too would succumb to the same hubris that had brought down so many before him. He saw the throne as a precipice, a place from which the fall was both catastrophic and inevitable. He feared that with no more external enemies to fight, the battle would turn inward and he would be left to wrestle with the temptations of his own ego. The idle mind of a victorious king, he reasoned, was a fertile ground for the seeds of corruption. This fear was not paranoia, but a profound self-awareness, a recognition of the inherent fragility of human virtue in the face of limitless power. He understood that the greatest victory was not over Afrasiab, but over the potential for tyranny that resides within every ruler. The desire to preserve his soul, to ensure that his legacy would remain untarnished, became more important to him than the continuation of his reign. He saw the act of clinging to power as the first step towards losing the very qualities that made him worthy of it in the first place. This spiritual crisis drove him to seek guidance from a higher power, to find a way to escape the cycle of pride and destruction that seemed to be the inescapable fate of kings. Driven by this spiritual crisis, Kay Khosrow turned away from the counsel of his courtiers and warriors and sought solace in prayer and contemplation. He withdrew from the daily affairs of the court, spending weeks in seclusion, his heart and mind fixed on the divine. He pleaded with Ahura Mazda, the supreme being in the Zoroastrian faith, for guidance, for a sign that would show him the path forward. His prayers were not for greater glory or a longer reign, but for release. He yearned to depart from the world of earthly concerns, to transcend the limitations of his mortal existence before he could be corrupted by them. His soul, he felt, had completed its work on earth, and now it longed for rest, for a return to its divine source. This period of intense spiritual seeking was a testament to the depth of his conviction. It was a king turning his back on his kingdom, not out of weakness or despair, but out of a profound desire for spiritual purity. He was no longer the warrior king, the avenger of his father's blood, but a humble seeker, a soul in search of its ultimate destiny. After a long period of fervent prayer, his plea was answered. The angel Sorush, a divine messenger in Zoroastrianism, appeared to him in a dream, bringing a message from the heavens. The message was clear: his time as king was over. He was to renounce his throne, give away his worldly possessions, and prepare for a final journey from which he would not return. This divine communication was the turning point, the moment that solidified his resolve and set him on his final, enigmatic path. It was a validation of his deepest fears and his most profound aspirations, a confirmation that the true purpose of his life lay not in ruling the world, but in transcending it. The king's decision to abdicate was met with shock and disbelief by the Persian nobles and his most loyal companions. They could not comprehend why a ruler at the pinnacle of his power, beloved by his people and feared by his enemies, would willingly choose to walk away from it all. Zal, the legendary hero and one of the king's most trusted advisors, was particularly vocal in his opposition, viewing the king's desire to renounce the throne as a dereliction of his sacred duty. A tense and emotional debate ensued, a clash of two irreconcilable worldviews. Zal, representing the traditional values of kingship and worldly responsibility, argued that the king's place was on the throne, guiding his people and protecting his realm. He saw Kay Khosrow's decision as an abandonment of the very principles for which they had fought so hard. He reminded the king of his glorious lineage, of the sacrifices that had been made to secure his reign, and of the chaos that could ensue in his absence. But Kay Khosrow's resolve was unshakable. He patiently explained to his distraught followers the nature of his spiritual crisis, his fear of succumbing to the pride that had destroyed so many great kings before him. He spoke of the divine message he had received, the call to a higher purpose that he could not ignore. He argued that true kingship was not about clinging to power, but about knowing when to let it go. It was about preserving the purity of one's soul, a treasure far more valuable than any earthly crown. He was not abandoning his people, he insisted, but rather setting an example of a different kind of leadership, one rooted in spiritual wisdom rather than temporal authority. Eventually, through the force of his conviction and the evident sincerity of his spiritual transformation, he managed to persuade even the skeptical Zal, who recognized that the king was being guided by a power beyond the comprehension of ordinary men. With his court finally, if reluctantly, accepting his decision, Kay Khosrow began the process of divesting himself of his worldly power. In a gesture that underscored the sincerity of his spiritual transformation, Kay Khosrow began to systematically dismantle his earthly authority. He opened the doors to his treasuries, not for his own enrichment, but to distribute his vast wealth among the poor, the widowed, and the orphaned. This act of radical generosity was a powerful statement, a demonstration that he no longer placed any value on the material trappings of his office. He was shedding the skin of the monarch, divesting himself of the very things that defined his worldly status. He gave away his lands and titles, ensuring that the transition of power would be orderly and just. His most crucial decision, however, was the selection of his successor. He chose Afrasiab, a man known for his wisdom and piety, to ascend the throne after his departure. This was a deliberate and thoughtful choice, a final act of responsible governance designed to ensure the continued stability and prosperity of his kingdom. He was not simply abandoning his post, he was carefully and deliberately passing the torch to a worthy successor, ensuring that the realm would be in capable hands. This process of renunciation was not an act of impulse, but a carefully orchestrated transition. It was a king consciously and methodically detaching himself from the world, not in a fit of despair, but with the calm and deliberate purpose of a man who has found a higher calling. Each act of divestment was a step on his new spiritual path, a severing of the ties that bound him to the material realm. He was preparing himself for a journey that required him to travel light, unburdened by the weight of a crown or the responsibilities of an empire. Having settled the affairs of his kingdom and named his successor, Kay Khosrow embarked on his final journey, a departure from the world of men and a pilgrimage to the realm of the spirit. He did not travel alone, at least not at first. He was accompanied by a group of his most loyal and devoted companions, legendary heroes like Give, Tus, and Bizan, men who had fought by his side and who could not bear the thought of being separated from their beloved king. Their destination was not a neighboring kingdom or a new territory to conquer, but a mystical mountain, a place that existed on the very edge of the material world, a gateway to the divine. This was not a journey of conquest, but one of renunciation, a final symbolic act of turning his back on the world he had once ruled. The path they took was arduous, a reflection of the spiritual trial that lay ahead. As they ascended the mountain, the landscape grew increasingly harsh, the air thinner, the world below receding into a distant memory. This physical ascent was a metaphor for the spiritual journey itself, a climbing towards a higher state of consciousness, away from the familiar and the mundane. The mountain was both a physical and a metaphysical destination, a place where the veil between the worlds was thin, where a mortal king could hope to catch a glimpse of the eternal. The journey was a test of faith, not only for Kay Khosrow, but also for the companions who had chosen to follow him into the unknown. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known, their families, their homes, their very identities as warriors and nobles, all for the sake of their king's enigmatic quest. As the small band of pilgrims ascended the mystical mountain, they were engulfed by a supernatural blizzard, a storm that seemed to emanate not from the sky, but from the very heart of the mountain itself. The wind howled with an otherworldly voice, and the snow fell in a blinding torrent, erasing the path behind them and obscuring the world ahead. This was no ordinary storm. It was a divine test, a crucible designed to separate the truly enlightened from those who were still bound by the limitations of the material world. At each stage of the ascent, as the storm raged with increasing ferocity, Kay Khosrow would turn to his companions and ask them a simple question: "What do you see?" Their answers revealed the state of their spiritual understanding. The first, a practical warrior, saw only a terrible blizzard, a physical obstacle that needed to be overcome. He advised turning back, waiting for a more opportune moment to continue the journey. Kay Khosrow, understanding that this companion was not yet ready for the truth that lay ahead, thanked him for his loyalty and sent him back down the mountain. He recognized that the path to spiritual truth cannot be approached with the same logic as a military campaign. It is not a matter of strategy or timing, but of a profound and unwavering inner readiness. The storm was a filter, a divine mechanism for revealing the true nature of each of the companions' souls. It was a test of perception, a challenge to see beyond the literal and to grasp the symbolic meaning of the ordeal they were facing. The remaining companions pressed onward, climbing higher into the heart of the raging blizzard. The storm intensified, its power seeming to grow with each step they took. Again, Kay Khosrow paused and posed his enigmatic question to the next of his followers, a great general renowned for his martial prowess. The general, true to his warrior spirit, responded with a declaration of defiance. He would draw his sword, he proclaimed, and cut a path through the storm, forcing their way to the summit through sheer force of will. Kay Khosrow, with a gentle sadness, explained that the path to enlightenment cannot be cleared with a blade. It is not a fortress to be conquered, but a mystery to be surrendered to. The tools of the warrior, the strategies of the battlefield, are useless in the face of a spiritual trial. He too was sent back, his courage and loyalty unquestioned, but his understanding incomplete. The journey continued, and the king posed his question to the next companion, a man whose defining characteristic was his unwavering devotion to his king. This companion declared that he would follow his king to the ends of the earth, that his loyalty was absolute and unconditional. Kay Khosrow praised his devotion, but gently explained that devotion alone was not enough. The path to divine union requires more than just loyalty to a mortal leader. It requires a direct and personal connection to the divine itself. With a heavy heart, this loyal follower was also sent back down the mountain. The thinning of the ranks was not a sign of failure, but a necessary part of the process. Each departure represented the shedding of a particular worldly attachment, pragmatism, force, even personal devotion. Kay Khosrow was being stripped of his earthly connections, preparing for a final encounter that he had to face alone. Finally, only one companion remained by Kay Khosrow's side, the wise Pashutan. They had reached the summit of the mountain, and the supernatural storm now raged with an unimaginable, terrifying power. It was a vortex of cosmic energy, a whirlwind of snow and ice that seemed to threaten to tear the very fabric of the world apart. In the midst of this elemental chaos, Kay Khosrow turned to his last and wisest companion and asked his question one final time. Pashutan, looking not at the storm but through it, into its very essence, gave the answer that revealed his profound spiritual insight. "This is not a storm of ice and wind," he declared, his voice calm and steady amidst the tempest. "This is a divine mercy, a purification. It is not an obstacle, but the path itself." In that moment, Pashutan demonstrated that he understood the true nature of the ordeal. He saw not a destructive force, but a transformative one. He recognized that the blizzard was not a barrier to their destination, but the very means by which they would reach it. It was a divine ablution, a spiritual cleansing that was washing away the last vestiges of their mortal selves, preparing them for the encounter with the divine. His words were a testament to a faith that could perceive the sacred in the heart of the profane, the divine purpose in the midst of chaos. He had passed the final test, the test of perception, and had proven himself worthy of witnessing the final miraculous act of his king's spiritual journey. At the very moment that Pashutan uttered his words of profound understanding, a brilliant, blinding light descended upon the mountain's peak. It was a light of such intensity and purity that it seemed to consume everything it touched, a light that was not of the sun or the stars, but from the very source of creation itself. Overwhelmed by the sheer power of this divine manifestation, Pashutan instinctively averted his eyes, shielding himself from a glory that no mortal was meant to behold directly. When he looked back, only a second later, Kay Khosrow was gone. The king had vanished without a trace, his earthly form dissolved into the ethereal light. All that remained of his physical presence was his royal cloak, lying pristine upon the pure white snow, a final, tangible link to the world he had left behind. Then a voice, seeming to emanate from the heavens themselves, echoed across the silent, snow-covered peak. "He has returned to the light," the voice declared. "He has achieved union." The disappearance of Kay Khosrow was not a death, but a transfiguration. It was the ultimate culmination of his spiritual quest, the final, irreversible step in his journey from earthly king to enlightened being. He had not been taken by the storm. He had become one with the light. This event, known as his occultation, is one of the most mystical and profound moments in the Shahnameh. It represents the ultimate triumph of the spirit over the material world, the final victory in a war that had been waged not on the battlefields of Iran and Turan, but in the secret depths of the king's own soul. The heroes who had been sent back down the mountain, who had not heeded the king's warning about the storm, were found later, buried in the snow, a tragic testament to the fact that they were not yet ready for the final, transformative revelation. Their loyalty was unquestionable, but their spiritual understanding was incomplete. They could follow their king to the ends of the earth, but they could not follow him into the realm of the spirit. The story of Kay Khosrow's abdication and disappearance is a rich tapestry of symbolism, deeply rooted in the philosophical and religious traditions of ancient Iran. At its core, it is a narrative about the transcendence of the self, the voluntary relinquishment of the ego in pursuit of a higher state of being. The throne, in this context, represents the pinnacle of worldly achievement, the ultimate symbol of the self's power and dominion over the external world. By walking away from the throne, Kay Khosrow is symbolically walking away from the limitations of his own ego, from the pride and attachment that are the inevitable byproducts of worldly success. His journey up the mountain is a classic allegorical representation of a spiritual ascent, a movement from a lower to a higher plane of consciousness. The increasing harshness of the terrain and the escalating intensity of the storm symbolize the trials and tribulations that one must face on the path to enlightenment. These are not external obstacles, but internal ones, the attachments, fears, and illusions that must be overcome before one can achieve spiritual clarity. The companions who are sent back one by one represent the different aspects of the self that must be shed on this journey. The pragmatic warrior represents the attachment to worldly logic and strategy. The defiant general represents the illusion that the will can conquer all things. The devoted follower represents the danger of attaching oneself to a temporal guide rather than seeking a direct connection to the divine. Each departure is a necessary purification, a stripping away of the layers of the false self to reveal the true spiritual core. The final act of Kay Khosrow's transfiguration, his dissolution into a divine light, is a powerful metaphor for the concept of vassal, or union with the divine, a central theme in many mystical traditions, including Sufism, which would later flourish in Persia. This is not an annihilation of the self, but an expansion of it, a merging of the individual consciousness with the universal consciousness. The king does not die, he becomes one with the eternal. His story, therefore, is not a tragedy, but the ultimate success story from a spiritual perspective. He is the king who conquered the world only to realize that the true kingdom was within. The narrative also carries a profound political and philosophical message about the nature of ideal kingship. Kay Khosrow becomes the archetypal philosopher, king, a ruler whose wisdom is so profound that he understands the ultimate futility of his own power. His abdication is not an act of weakness, but of supreme strength and self-awareness. It is a recognition that the true purpose of a king is not to rule forever, but to create a just and stable society, and then, when his work is done, to step aside, lest he become a tyrant. He is the king who knows when to let go, a lesson that countless rulers throughout history have failed to learn. In this sense, his story is a cautionary tale, a warning against the corrupting influence of power, and a testament to the idea that the greatest leaders are those who are willing to relinquish their authority for the sake of a higher principle. The legacy of Kay Khosrow is a complex and multifaceted one. In the annals of the Shahnameh, he is remembered as one of the greatest and most righteous kings of Iran, a ruler who brought peace and justice to his land and avenged the wrongful death of his father. His reign is held up as a golden age, a standard against which all other kings are measured. But his true legacy lies not in his worldly achievements, but in the profound and enigmatic act of his departure. He became a symbol of a different kind of power, a power rooted not in worldly authority, but in spiritual enlightenment. His story resonated deeply within Persian culture, influencing centuries of philosophical and mystical thought. He became an archetype of the seeker, the individual who, having exhausted the possibilities of the material world, turns his gaze inward in search of a deeper truth. His tale is a testament to the idea that the ultimate human quest is not for power or wealth, but for self-realization and union with the divine. The ambiguity of his end, his disappearance into the light, has allowed his story to be interpreted in many different ways. For some, he is a historical figure who, weary of the burdens of rule, simply retired to a life of asceticism. For others, he is a purely mythological figure, a symbol of the eternal human yearning for transcendence. In some traditions, he is even considered a prophet, a man who achieved such a high degree of spiritual purity that he was granted a special closeness to God. There are even beliefs that he never truly left the world, but remains alive in a hidden spiritual state, waiting for the end of time when he will return to aid the final Saushant or savior in the ultimate battle against evil. This belief in his immortality further cements his status as a transcendent figure, a king who has passed beyond the normal cycle of life and death. The narrative of Kay Khosrow offers a profound and enduring critique of our conventional notions of success and ambition. In a world that so often equates greatness with the accumulation of power, wealth, and influence, his story presents a radical alternative. It suggests that true success may lie not in winning the world, but in letting it go. Kay Khosrow's journey forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about our own lives and our own ambitions. What is the ultimate goal of our striving? What do we do when we have achieved everything we set out to accomplish? Is there a point at which the pursuit of more becomes a spiritual liability rather than a material asset? His story suggests that the insatiable hunger for worldly achievement can become a trap, a gilded cage that prevents us from seeking a deeper, more meaningful existence. He is the man who had it all and realized that it was not enough. This is not a message of nihilism or despair, but one of profound hope. It suggests that there is a dimension of human experience that lies beyond the rat race of worldly ambition, a realm of spiritual fulfillment that is accessible to all who are willing to seek it. His abdication is a powerful act of rebellion against the tyranny of the ego, a declaration of independence from the relentless demands of worldly success. It is a reminder that the greatest empires are not those of land and armies, but those of the soul. The character of Kay Khosrow can be seen as an embodiment of the Zoroastrian ideal of Asher, or righteousness. Asher is one of the central concepts in Zoroastrianism, representing the divine order, truth, and justice that governs the universe. A righteous individual is one who lives in accordance with this divine order, whose thoughts, words, and deeds are aligned with the forces of good. Kay Khosrow's entire life can be seen as a struggle to uphold Asher in a world that is constantly threatened by the forces of Druj, or falsehood and chaos, personified by his nemesis, Afrasiab. His war of revenge is not just a personal quest, but a cosmic battle to restore order and justice to the world. However, his story also demonstrates the profound Zoroastrian understanding that the battle between Asher and Druj is not just an external one, it is also an internal one, waged within the heart of every individual. After defeating the external forces of chaos, Kay Khosrow realizes that the potential for Druj still exists within himself, in the form of pride, arrogance, and the potential for tyranny. His decision to abdicate is therefore the ultimate act of Asher, a preemptive strike against the forces of falsehood within his own soul. He chooses to preserve his righteousness rather than risk corrupting it by clinging to power. His final journey and transfiguration can be seen as the ultimate realization of Asher, a complete and total alignment with the divine order, emerging with the very essence of truth and light. He becomes not just a practitioner of Asher, but an embodiment of it, a luminous example of a soul that has achieved perfect harmony with the universe. The story of Kay Khosrow's final journey is a masterclass in the use of extended metaphor to convey complex spiritual ideas. The physical landscape of the journey becomes a direct reflection of the internal spiritual landscape of the seeker. The ascent of the mountain is the ascent of consciousness. The increasing difficulty of the path represents the increasing difficulty of the spiritual trials one must face as one moves closer to the ultimate truth. The storm is not just a weather event, it is the manifestation of the chaos and confusion of the unenlightened mind, the turmoil that must be passed through to achieve a state of inner peace and clarity. The companions who are sent back are not just characters in a story, they are personifications of the different aspects of the self that must be relinquished. They are the attachments, the false beliefs, the limiting perspectives that hold us back from our spiritual potential. The final dialogue between Kay Khosrow and Pashutan is the culmination of this metaphorical journey. Pashutan's ability to see the divine purpose in the storm is a metaphor for the enlightened perspective. The ability to see beyond the surface of things and to perceive the hidden spiritual reality that lies beneath. His insight is the key that unlocks the final mystery, the gateway to the divine. The disappearance of Kay Khosrow into the light is the ultimate metaphorical representation of spiritual realization. It is a powerful and evocative image that conveys a truth that cannot be expressed in literal language, the dissolution of the individual ego into the boundless ocean of divine consciousness. Through this masterful use of metaphor, the story of Kay Khosrow transforms a simple narrative of a king's abdication into a profound and timeless allegory of the human spiritual quest. While the story of Kay Khosrow is deeply embedded in the specifics of Persian mythology and Zoroastrian theology, its central themes are universal, resonating with the spiritual traditions of cultures from all over the world. The archetype of the enlightened ruler who renounces his throne can be found in the story of the Buddha, who left his palace and his princely life to seek an end to suffering, and in the legend of the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who voluntarily abdicated to cultivate his gardens. The idea of a spiritual journey as an arduous ascent up a holy mountain is a recurring motif in countless religious traditions, from Moses climbing Mount Sinai to the pilgrims of countless faiths who undertake challenging journeys to sacred peaks. The concept of a divine test or trial that one must pass to prove one's spiritual worthiness is a fundamental element of the hero's journey in myths and legends from every corner of the globe. The idea of union with the divine as the ultimate goal of the spiritual path is a cornerstone of mystical traditions everywhere, from the Sufis of Islam to the Christian mystics and the yogis of India. The story of Kay Khosrow, therefore, is not just a piece of Persian folklore. It is a Persian articulation of a universal human story, the story of the soul's yearning for transcendence, its quest for a reality that lies beyond the confines of the material world. It is a testament to the fact that, regardless of our cultural or religious background, we are all, in some way, on a journey up our own mystical mountain, facing our own spiritual storms and seeking our own ultimate union with the light. The narrative of Kay Khosrow presents a profound paradox. The king who achieves his greatest triumph in the moment of his ultimate surrender. In a world that is so often defined by a binary opposition between winning and losing, success and failure, his story collapses these distinctions. He wins by quitting, he triumphs by abdicating, he achieves immortality by disappearing. This paradoxical logic is a hallmark of mystical thought, which often seeks to transcend the limitations of conventional, dualistic thinking. The story challenges us to reconsider our own definitions of strength and weakness. Is true strength the ability to hold on to power at all costs, or is it the ability to let it go? Is true victory the conquest of an external enemy or the conquest of the self? Kay Khosrow's journey suggests that the ultimate power lies not in dominion over others, but in mastery over oneself. His surrender is not an act of defeat, but of supreme self-control, a conscious and deliberate choice to step outside the endless cycle of ambition and conflict. The story also presents a paradox about the nature of legacy. We often think of legacy in terms of tangible achievements, the monuments we build, the empires we create, the institutions we establish. But Kay Khosrow's legacy is defined not by what he built, but by what he walked away from. His true monument is not a palace or a statue, but the enduring power of his story, the inspiration it provides for all who seek a different kind of greatness. He teaches us that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to refuse to play the game, that the most enduring legacy you can leave is to become a symbol of a higher possibility. The tale of Kay Khosrow's renunciation can also be read as a profound political allegory, a commentary on the inherent dangers of the nation-state and the cyclical nature of conflict. His entire reign, up to the point of his abdication, is defined by war. He is born out of a conflict between Iran and Turan, and his primary purpose as king is to wage a war of revenge against his father's murderer. He is, in essence, a product of and a participant in the endless cycle of violence that characterizes the relationship between these two rival powers. His ultimate victory over Afrasiab brings peace, but it is a peace that has been bought at a terrible cost, a peace that is built on a foundation of bloodshed and destruction. His decision to abdicate, in this context, can be seen as a radical rejection of this entire system. It is a recognition that true peace cannot be achieved through military victory, because violence only begets more violence. It is an understanding that the very structures of power, the very existence of rival kingdoms with their competing interests and their endless cycles of grievance and retribution are the root cause of the problem. By walking away from the throne, Kay Khosrow is walking away from the world of politics, from the endless game of thrones that has caused so much suffering. He is seeking a different kind of peace, a peace that is not contingent on the defeat of an enemy, but on the transcendence of the very idea of enmity. His journey to the mystical mountain is a journey beyond the borders of his own kingdom, a journey into a realm where the distinctions between Iranian and Turanian, friend and foe, cease to have any meaning. It is a search for a universal truth that transcends the narrow confines of national identity and political allegiance. The character of Kay Khosrow serves as a powerful archetype of the wounded healer, the individual who, having experienced great personal trauma, is able to transform that suffering into a source of wisdom and compassion for others. His life begins with the ultimate wound, the murder of his father and his subsequent exile in the court of his enemy. This early experience of loss and injustice shapes his entire destiny, fueling his quest for revenge and his relentless pursuit of justice. However, unlike many who are consumed by their desire for vengeance, Kay Khosrow is able to move beyond it. After he has achieved his revenge, after he has brought his father's murderer to justice, he does not descend into a spiral of further violence and tyranny. Instead, he turns his attention to the healing of his kingdom, ushering in an era of peace and prosperity. But his ultimate act of healing is a personal one. He recognizes that the wounds he has carried his entire life cannot be fully healed by external victories. The true source of his suffering lies not in the past, but in the present, in the very nature of his own power and the potential for corruption that it holds. His decision to abdicate is therefore an act of profound self-healing, a decision to cleanse himself of the spiritual toxins that have accumulated over a lifetime of conflict and struggle. In doing so, he becomes a healer for his people in a much deeper sense. He does not just give them peace and security. He gives them a powerful new ideal of what it means to be a leader, a model of a king who is willing to sacrifice his own power for the sake of his spiritual integrity. He is the king who heals his kingdom by first healing himself, a timeless lesson in the transformative power of turning inward. The story of Kay Khosrow can be understood as a journey from the heroic to the sacred. The first part of his life is a classic heroic narrative. He is the hidden prince, the rightful heir who must overcome great obstacles to claim his throne. He is the warrior king who leads his armies into battle and defeats a powerful and evil enemy. His story is filled with the classic elements of the heroic epic: quests, battles, acts of valor, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. In this phase of his life, he is a hero in the traditional sense, a man who acts upon the world and changes it through his strength and courage. However, after his victory over Afrasiab, the narrative undergoes a profound shift. The focus moves from the external world of action and conflict to the internal world of contemplation and spiritual seeking. Kay Khosrow is no longer the hero who is trying to change the world. He is the mystic who is trying to transcend it. The challenges he faces are no longer physical, but spiritual. The enemies he must defeat are not armies, but the illusions and attachments of his own mind. This second phase of his life is a sacred narrative, a story not about what a man does, but about what he becomes. His final act is not an act of heroism in the conventional sense. It is an act of holiness. He does not save his kingdom from an external threat. He saves his own soul from an internal one. This transition from the heroic to the sacred represents a maturation of the human spirit, a movement from a concern with worldly affairs to a concern with eternal truths. It is a journey that many of us in our own lives are called to make, a journey from the desire to conquer the world to the desire to understand ourselves. The final scene of Kay Khosrow's story, his disappearance into a blinding light on a snow-covered mountaintop, is a powerful and enduring image, a visual symphony of symbolism. The mountain, as we have seen, represents the pinnacle of spiritual aspiration, the meeting point of heaven and earth. The snow, which covers the mountain in a blanket of pure white, symbolizes purity, purification, and the transcendence of the mundane world. It is a landscape that has been washed clean, a blank slate upon which the final act of the divine drama can be written. The storm, which rages with such supernatural fury, represents the final, terrifying, and ultimately purifying trial that the seeker must endure before achieving enlightenment. It is the chaos of the ego's dissolution, the tempest of the soul's final surrender. And then there is the light. The light, in almost every spiritual tradition, is a symbol of the divine, of ultimate reality, of the source of all being. It is the light of creation, the light of wisdom, the light of pure consciousness. Kay Khosrow's dissolution into this light is a visual representation of the ultimate goal of the mystical path, the merging of the individual soul with the divine source. It is a moment of pure, unadulterated transcendence, a visual poem that speaks to the deepest yearnings of the human spirit. The image of his empty cloak left behind on the snow is a poignant and powerful symbol of his final renunciation. It is the last remnant of his earthly identity, the final vestige of the king he once was. Its emptiness speaks volumes. The king is gone. The man is gone. All that remains is the light. The story of Kay Khosrow poses a fundamental challenge to the Western, particularly the modern, conception of the individual. In much of Western thought, the individual is seen as the primary unit of reality, and the goal of life is often framed in terms of self-actualization, self-expression, and the realization of one's personal ambitions. The self is something to be cultivated, strengthened, and celebrated. Kay Khosrow's story, however, comes from a tradition where the ultimate goal is not the glorification of the self, but its transcendence. The self in this worldview is not the ultimate reality, but an illusion, a temporary and transient construction that is the source of all our suffering. The path to true freedom lies not in building up the ego, but in dismantling it, in realizing that our true nature is not this limited, separate self, but the boundless, universal consciousness with which we are all ultimately one. Kay Khosrow's journey is a powerful illustration of this process. He begins as the ultimate individual, the king, the one whose will is law, whose identity is synonymous with the state. But through his spiritual seeking, he comes to realize the limitations of this individual self. He understands that it is a prison, not a palace. His final act of disappearing into the light is the ultimate act of self-transcendence, the final, joyful surrender of the limited self to the unlimited reality. It is a story that invites us to question our own deeply held assumptions about who we are and what we are here to do, and to consider the possibility that the greatest journey we can ever take is the journey beyond ourselves. The tale of Kay Khosrow is not merely a story to be read, it is a question to be lived. It does not provide easy answers, but instead invites us into a state of profound and unsettling inquiry. It asks us to look at our own lives, at our own ambitions, at our own relationship with power and success, and to ask ourselves if we are truly seeking what matters most. Are we, like the young Kay Khosrow, consumed by the quest for external validation for the throne of our own particular world? Or are we, like the old Kay Khosrow, beginning to hear a deeper call, a call to a different kind of journey, a journey inward? The story's ending is not a resolution, but an opening. It does not tell us what happened to Kay Khosrow in any literal sense. It simply points us towards a mystery, a possibility, a realm of experience that lies beyond the grasp of ordinary language. It is a story that is designed to awaken a sense of wonder, to stir a longing for the transcendent, to plant a seed of divine discontent in the soil of our everyday lives. It is a reminder that the world is more mysterious and we are more capable than we often allow ourselves to believe. It is an invitation to embark on our own journey of self-discovery, to climb our own mystical mountains, and to see for ourselves what lies at the summit. The enduring power of Kay Khosrow's story lies in its ability to speak to the deepest and most timeless aspects of the human condition. We are all, in our own ways, kings and queens of our own small kingdoms. We all have our thrones of ambition, our crowns of identity, our territories of belief that we guard so fiercely. And we all, at some point in our lives, come to realize the limitations of these kingdoms. We all experience moments of disillusionment, moments when the victories we have won feel hollow, when the success we have achieved fails to bring us the peace we crave. It is in these moments that the story of Kay Khosrow speaks to us most powerfully. It offers us a different map, a different set of coordinates for navigating the journey of our lives. It suggests that the true north lies not in the external world of achievement, but in the internal world of the spirit. It reminds us that the greatest adventure is not the one that takes us to the ends of the earth, but the one that takes us to the center of our own being. And it offers us a profound and enduring hope, the hope that it is possible to walk away from the prisons of our own making, to shed the skins of our old identities, and to, in the end, merge with a light that is brighter and more beautiful than anything we could have ever imagined. His story is not just the story of a long-dead Persian king. It is our story. It is the story of the eternal human quest for meaning, for purpose, and for a home that lies beyond the confines of this world. In the final analysis, the story of why Kay Khosrow walked away from his throne is the story of a man who chose the infinite over the finite, the eternal over the temporal, the soul over the self. It is a story that reminds us that there are some victories that can only be won through surrender, some kingdoms that can only be gained through abdication, and some lives that can only be truly found by being willing to lose them. It is a testament to the idea that the human spirit, in its deepest and most authentic expression, is not content with the limitations of the material world. It yearns for something more, for something that cannot be bought or sold, conquered or controlled. It yearns for the light. Kay Khosrow's journey is a beacon for all who feel this yearning, a guiding star for all who are willing to embark on the perilous but ultimately rewarding journey of self-discovery. His story is a timeless gift, a whisper from the ancient world that speaks directly to the heart of our modern anxieties, a reminder that the most profound and meaningful life is not the one that is lived in the pursuit of power, but the one that is lived in the pursuit of truth. He walked away from his throne not because he was a failed king, but because he was the ultimate king, a king who understood that the true crown is not made of gold, but of light, and that the true kingdom is not of this world.